All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle a question that on the surface sounds almost silly. But believe me, this exact question sparked a multi-million-dollar legal war that literally changed the rules for how thousands of products get imported. So, is a Halloween costume a piece of clothing, or is it something else entirely? No, really, think about it for a second. You wear them both, they're both made out of fabric, they kind of do the same job, right? Well, as we're about to find out, the answer to that simple question has massive financial consequences, and it pits our everyday common sense against the super fine print of international law. And right here, this is why anyone even cared in the first place. It all comes down to money. For a big American costume company called Ruby's, this was a life or death issue. See, if imported costumes are clothing, they get slapped with high taxes, or tariffs. That makes them more expensive, which helps a domestic company like Ruby's compete. But if they're called a festive item, that tariff drops to zero. The market gets flooded with cheap imports. So for Ruby's, this wasn't just some legal game. This was about survival. And that set the stage for a huge legal showdown, Ruby's costume company versus the United States government. And the whole thing was about cheap, imported witch and pirate costumes. But for Ruby's, the argument felt so simple, so powerful. You wear them, so they must be clothing. End of story. And you know what? At first, their case looked like a total slam dunk. They had evidence that seemed rock solid, written right into the law. They walked into that courtroom with what they thought was a completely open and shut argument. It just seemed impossible to lose.
This right here, this was their smoking gun. The actual legal text for festive items, the zero tariff category, seemed to spell it out. It explicitly says it does not cover fancy dress.
So Ruby's lawyers basically opened up a dictionary in the middle of the courtroom. Their argument was, Your Honor, look, it's simple. The dictionary says fancy dress just means a costume. The law says fancy dress is excluded from this category. Case closed. What else is there to even talk about? And that was their knockout punch. If the law excludes costumes from being festive items, well, then by process of elimination, they have to be clothing. And that means they get hit with those high tariffs. It was just an incredibly powerful, straightforward argument.
And guess what? It worked. The first court, the Court of International Trade, they bought it completely. They handed Ruby's a huge victory. It looked like it was all over, the case was settled. But the fight was far, far from over.
So the government appealed, and the case went to a higher court. And this is where the story takes a wild, dramatic turn. The government lawyers came back with a completely different angle, and it all focused on just a few words that everyone else, including the first judge, had totally overlooked. Just picture the scene in the courtroom. The government's lawyer stands up and essentially says this. Wait, read the whole sentence. That's it. A simple command that changed absolutely everything. They argued that Ruby's and the first court had stopped reading the law way too soon. They pointed right back to that exact same line of text, the one Ruby's thought was their golden ticket. But they told the judges, look closer, look past the obvious. Because the real key wasn't the phrase, fancy dress, at all. Oh no, it was the 7 little words that came right after it, of Chapter 61 or 62. Those words, the government claimed, were the key to the entire case.
And here was their brilliant, killer argument. They said that phrase isn't just a casual description, it's a condition. It's a quality test. It doesn't mean something is excluded just because it's a costume. It means it's only excluded if that costume is first well made enough to meet the quality standards of actual clothing, which falls under Chapter 61 or 62.
And then they went from talking about legal theory to showing the court the cold, hard reality. They literally held up these cheap costumes for everyone to see. And they said, look at this thing. The edges are raw, they're going to fray, the fabric is flimsy, it's not durable. They weren't just arguing about words anymore, they were talking about the physical object itself. So their point was this: the essential character of these things isn't to be clothing. The edges are unfinished, the material is thin, the whole construction is cheap. They aren't made to last. Their entire value is festive. You wear it for a few hours on Halloween, and then you probably throw it away. It is not functional clothing. And the appeals court agreed with them. They completely overturned the original decision. The final verdict was that because these costumes were so poorly made, they failed the quality test. They did not qualify as clothing, and therefore they stayed right where they were, in the festive item category, with 0 tariffs. A totally stunning reversal. Now, this ruling created this really bizarre
backward situation for anyone making or importing costumes. It's something we can call the paradox of quality.
Okay, so think about it this way. Let's look at path 1. If you decide to make a really nice, high-quality costume, with good fabric, finished seams, something that'll last, well, it passes the quality test. It gets classified as clothing, and bam, you get hit with high import taxes. You're basically punished for making a good product.
But now look at path 2. If you intentionally make a flimsy, cheap costume, you cut corners, you leave the edges raw, you use thin material, it fails the quality test. It gets classified as a festive item, and you pay 0 tariffs. You are financially rewarded for making a worse product. How crazy is that?
So what's the big takeaway from this whole legal drama? Well, the Ruby's case set a really important universal principle that guides how customs officials classify all kinds of products today, way beyond just costumes.
And this just sums it up perfectly. It really doesn't matter what you call an item. You can call this a pirate shirt all day long. What matters is what it is. The customs officials have to look at its physical nature, its construction, its quality, its essential character, to decide what it truly is. The name is basically irrelevant. The reality of the object is everything.
Which, of course, leaves us with a really fascinating question for today, doesn't it? I mean, this whole ruling was about cheap, throwaway costumes. But what about the world we live in now, with incredibly high-end cosplay and perfect screen-accurate movie replicas that are often made better than our normal clothes? In a world where festive fun and clothing quality are blurring together, where exactly should we draw that line now?